Hello, everyone. Hello, Liz. So good to see
Hi.
you. So, welcome everybody to today's show. We're going to be taking a deep dive into creativity. It's called The Imagination Imperative. And we have the best guest ever, Liz Kimball. Give her a big round of applause. Before I introduce her, I just want to find out where you all are coming from. So if you would go ahead and write in the chat where you are coming from. I know we've got people coming in from all over. We've got family coming in. We've got friends from Stanford coming in. And we've also got a lot of friends and colleagues in the field of wellness who are coming in. So as you're coming in, just let us know where you're coming from. So Liz, welcome. I want to share with everybody a little bit about who you are and how amazing you are. So you are a published writer, director, and choreographer. You're a professional certified coach, a professor, a facilitator, an entrepreneur. You're a TEDx speaker, a fabulous talk that you gave on this whole idea of the original spark and how we're all imbued with this original spark. And we're going to be taking a deep dive into that. You are also the creator and founder of the Creative 15, which is a free program that's dedicated to helping each of us to become a little bit more creative. It's a 15-day program. And then perhaps, most importantly, you're my cousin. Which is so exciting, right? I'm so excited that that we get to be together on this. So I think, Liz, the place that I wanted to start with, since we are family, our family has kind of a conflicted relationship with creativity, which I don't think is unusual. So in my case, when I decided to leave teaching and I moved to New York for a couple of years to try to make it as a dancer, my dad nearly lost his mind. And yet we have a really creative family. So tell us a little bit from your perspective.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and hi to everyone who's joining us. And then the thing I just want to say that your audience might not know is I looked up to you my entire life. And I maybe even like wanted to be you a little bit. So the like inner child in me right now is just feeling so excited and really like she's arrived here at this LinkedIn Live. So thank you.
You have arrived. We've both arrived.
It's so fascinating, right? I'd be curious, what everyone else's kind of relationship with creativity in their family feels like. Because in my nuclear family, I grew up in this wild, sort of really unconventional space where creativity was almost like our love language. Like it was how we connected. It was a family of artists. Some of my friends have said it was like a little bit like a commune. And it was the family business. So I actually had the opposite journey of you where it was like, there was no, of course you're going to become an artist, which I think is really, I even see some of our family here. So hi, Susanna. But of course that was going to happen. And so it's just such a different path. I didn't have to fight for it in the way that so many of us do.
So I'm curious first of all, we got people coming in from Kentucky, Hawaii. We've got California, New York. Susanna, nice to see you. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We got Virginia, all kinds of people. So for our audience, I'm curious, was creativity supported in your family, or did you have to fight for that? So, and also part two to that question is, are you creative? Are you creative? So Liz, when I know a lot of times when we ask people that question, are you creative? People cringe. And often people say, oh no, I'm not creative. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Well, I think one of the uncomfortable pieces of this question is actually that I really think that asking, are you creative, is like asking, are you alive, or are you a human being, or are you breathing? Because creativity, to create sort of in its simplest form, is just to make something new, to create something new that didn't exist, that is fundamental to us as human beings. But we as a society just like love to categorize people into like the creative people and the non-creative people. And when and it can sort of have all kinds of effects on us. But when we're categorized as like, oh, I'm not a creative person, it's almost like we're cutting ourselves off from a very deep and real and human part of ourselves, which is this, we're going to express it in all kinds of different ways, and that will be different. But I think, that's part of why it makes us cringe. And then I think the other thing is that we have like this love and also kind of strained relationship with creativity, because we all start out extremely creative as kids. And then there's all kinds of experiences that can kind of strip us from it, or not kind of give us the permission that we always originally had.
Right. Yeah. And I love, Liz, that you shared that, we're not creative because of a certain career that we have or don't have. We're creative because we're born, and each of us has this original spark. So why is it, if we're born with this and we all are creative, and in some cases, maybe we have to unearth that a little bit more. And I'm seeing here a couple of people are sharing that Robin shared that creativity was supported in her family. It's so great to see that. So nice that there's that. And then also, I created my own creativity with the abundance of experiences, so went to the hammock in nature to read a book versus a chair, which I know we're going to be talking about in just a moment, Elizabeth, about this idea about setting up your environment to kind of unearth that creativity. So let's talk a little bit about, why it is that it's beaten out of us. And especially, we need creativity more than anything else. This is kind of innovation, and creativity is what has set the United States apart from the rest of the world. And yet we have such a conflicted relationship with it. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts about why that's beaten out of us.
Yeah, I really do want to just echo that. I think it is the skill set of the knowledge economy. Like it is, and it's so interesting that it's not often encouraged, because from a strategic perspective, it's really like the most valuable skill set. Okay, so when I graduated college, my first, I moved to New York to be an actor, as you know, and I had to have some other jobs to support my acting. So one of my jobs was teaching ballet to like 4 and 5-year-olds. And I had a little student named Ava. And, when I think about Ava, like I think we have a sort of small collection of really great teachers in our lifetime. And I think Ava was like, she's one of the great teachers of my lifetime, because she would, she started off like a little bit shy, but when she would come into class each week, just as we started to get going, her entire face would light up, her eyes would widen, and she would shout, "This is the class where we make magic in every moment." And she was just, each week, it just kind of like this enthusiasm grew. And I just couldn't stop thinking about this student, because I was like in my 20s at the time, and I was very preoccupied with looking cool and trying to be who I thought everyone wanted me to be, when inside of me is Ava. Like, I just want to exclaim about how much I love life and love the moment and love creativity. And she just reminded me that like that's in me and that is in all of us. So I had another student, and her name was Stella. And she was like, not the same as Ava, but like really, really curious. And like just came into class with like a list of 20 questions every single week. And just wanted to be at the front of the line, and just like passionate about the craft and about what we were doing. And then there was a day that Stella came into the class and she had no questions. And she didn't want to stand at the front of the line. And I could just tell, ballet, and like there are mirrors, there's like all kinds of things that go on with ballet and mirrors. And I could just tell that it was the day where she was aware of how others were perceiving her. And whatever she thought she was almost like simultaneously not enough and too much at the same time. So she was just sort of completely censoring herself. And
I love this idea of not enough and yet too much. And that transition, unfortunately, happens in so many girls, where they go from being so expansive to then crossing this threshold where they start to become more self-conscious, and they literally start to physically shrink in, but also energetically. And certainly creativity is so tied in with that. So let's talk a little bit about, this idea of creative well-being. I mean, one of the things that is so striking to me is we have this conflicted relationship. And by the way, you may be hearing a conflicted relationship with noise right now. There's a lot of stuff going on outside here. But, one of the things that I often think about with this idea of, really being expansive, really being our true selves, and yet we feel so hemmed in, all of us, girls, boys, men, women. And yet, one of the top dying regret that this hospice nurse, Bronnie Ware, heard after working with dying patients for over 15 years was, I wish I had led a life true to myself, not the one that others expected of me. So again, back to this idea of this original spark, it's all in us, and we all truly want that to come forward, and yet for whatever reason feel like that we can't really bring that forward. So talk with us about creative well-being and kind of how that ties with each of us really becoming our best selves.
Yeah, so I love this question. I think our creative well-being is sort of a part of our overall well-being that we're not always talking about enough. And I think of it like the courage to follow our curiosity. So that's like what our original spark is our original curiosity. And each of us
And
has
perhaps to do that, follow that original curiosity enthusiastically.
So it's curiosity and enthusiasm. And what's so cool is nobody has the same curiosity and enthusiasm. It's a very unique constellation. So when we're worried about like being original or being like, how am I being, one of I think a creative block that comes up a lot is like, it's all been done before, but nobody has the curiosity and enthusiasm that you have. And no one will have that in the rest of time, in the rest of history. So there's really no way, we're all stealing from each other all the time, but we're never actually going to create the same thing that anybody else is going to create. So
isn't that a lot like, Liz, isn't that a lot like Oscar Wilde's quote, be yourself, everyone else is taken?
But it's so wise. It's so true. And we think about how much energy, and again, coming back from the cultural memo. So Stella did not felt like she could be herself. So it was like, she felt like she sort of then had to fit herself into something. There's so much energy expended there.
Mm-hmm.
And when we finally say, you know what, all I got really is my curiosity and enthusiasm and whatever kind of emotional reserves I have to express that. So there's a freeing, I think, moment in our lives when we just decide to sort of double down on that. And that's what I really think creative well-being is about, is the courage to follow that curiosity, then the courage to trust the ideas that come from it, act on those ideas. So I think that's the really important part, that sometimes we get the ideas, but then we're not trusting them. And then we're not kind of having the courage to make them into something. And then finally, like sometimes the biggest courage of all is sharing those ideas with people, with the world, because that's the final part of a creative process is I'm creating something and then I'm giving it. Like I have a gift and I have to give it out. And sometimes we can also, get blocked there too.
And I think so much of this kind of bringing it forward and giving it is the willingness to gamble with imperfection. So I often think about Brene Brown's quote, and I tell this to myself all the time, which is, I am imperfect and I am enough. So, or progress over perfection. It's going to be imperfect. Every single creative act by definition is imperfect. And yet, this is part and parcel to who we are, not only individually, but also collectively. I want to pause really quick. So Robin shares here, my mom was a kindergarten teacher. She always allowed me freedom to be creative. Summers were spent camping by a lake where I was free to wander along the lake shore, exploring nature and inventing new games. And, Liz, one of the things that I think is so fascinating about creativity and play, and Robin, I'm so glad that you brought this up, is not only do we need this to perform at high levels, but there's some really interesting research around by a guy by the name of Peter Gray, who's out of Boston University. And what he's found is that since the 1950s, there's been a precipitous drop in the amount of free play that children are engaging in. And what his research shows is that this kind of creative, unsupervised free play, where they get to direct their own play and play through discovery, that actually helps them to develop their internal locus of control. And we need that to navigate anxiety. And so it's his hypothesis that one of the reasons why we've got such a rise in anxiety is because of the reduction in free play. And sure, there's lots of supervised play. More often than not, when we see kids play, it's likely to be there's a coach directing them, or a parent directing them, or an instructor directing them, rather than them really figuring it out themselves. So what are your thoughts around that idea of free play and creativity?
Yeah, I think it's an essential piece of creative well-being. And I think it's one of the reasons why I realized how different creative well-being can be from your path, because I was like leading a very artistic career and I had a very low feeling of creative well-being because I did not trust my ideas and I did not follow my curiosity. And I think what kids are doing in that time is they're learning to follow their own impulse, which is what creativity is, instead of like what the prescribed path is or what I'm supposed to be doing. And that's like, I can't really think of a better skill to teach a child than to learn to listen to themselves, shut out all of that other noise that people are telling you how to be and what to do, and actually follow what that is. So I think, and it's also why when I'm working with a person or an organization as we get older, I think we all need some kind of pocket of that non-results oriented exploration, even if it's just a little bit every day. The irony is that's actually when we get the really great ideas, is when we have more of that kind of open time, open space to allow our brains to wander, which a lot of us will kind of think of as like not a good use of our time. I have found that is actually when we start to see some of the fruits of creativity that we're all sort of hungry for.
I've heard it characterized as white space, or just, the power of daydreaming, or even going on walks where the focus isn't on being creative or being productive or generative, but in fact, it is the most generative space that we can be in. And I think for any of us, if we think about where we got our best ideas, it's often when we're doing something completely unrelated, like taking a shower. And that's when our best ideas emerge.
And I would say it really, it intersects with so much of your work, Laura. Like, I don't think creativity, the best ideas happen when you're sitting. I just don't. Like, I think that they're usually related to some kind of movement and some kind of time when you are not putting because when we try to put the pressure on ourselves to be brilliant, that's when the perfectionism comes up. It's like the worst recipe. And that's why it's saying to tell people to be more creative or more innovative is like, that's exactly how we don't get the good ideas.
Well, and what's ironic is that if we're going to pursue an explicitly creative path, like being a performer, then the problem is that we have to be the best at it, or else it's not, it doesn't really count. So isn't that ironic, when in fact the only path toward creativity is actually the imperfections along the way? I want to pause. So Amy writes, in an employee wellness program I managed, there was a component called create your own, because we wanted people to be creative and do what speaks to them for well-being. And what are your thoughts on that, Liz?
Yeah, I mean, what I hear there is like, create from self versus create from a template, or create from sort of like a somebody else's formula. And that's why, I think the biggest kind of thing we can do to navigate all of that really tricky creative block is just do everything we can to turn off that outside noise, whether it's like our phone and our email, or all of everyone, who trained you's ideas about what is good, and just say, I'm not going to think about what's good or what's bad. I'm going to think about what's true. And that's been a helpful kind of metric for me to say, like, I cannot control if this is good or bad. That's going to make everything terrible. But I can say, am I being true to, as Amy says, like whatever that own voice is that's coming up inside of me?
So let's talk a little bit about Twyla Tharp characterizes this as developing, quote, the creative habit. So Twyla Tharp being longtime choreographer, we all know. And so what are some of your thoughts around how each of us can kind of nurture our creative, our inner creative being, our creative habit? And as you're addressing this, I would love to hear from our audience here around how do you nurture your creativity, your creative well-being, your creative habits? So give us some thoughts on that, Liz.
I think something that happens a lot, and I'm curious if this resonates, it certainly happens for me, that you sit down and you're like, well, I'm expecting brilliance today. Like I'm expecting some, I'm going to sit down to write and this better be a really amazing thing that I write today. When we're not necessarily showing up enough for that really to be something that could actually happen. So sometimes we're like expecting to show up and run a marathon and we haven't even been going to the gym. So I think of like a creativity gym as like a little habit that works for you. So we get all kinds of, messages about like the right habit because Stephen King writes 8 hours a day, or because Twyla Tharp has like a 2-hour morning habit, that we need to have somebody else's habit. But I really think we need to sort of ask, well, what would work in my life? What would feel good? And what is a manageable kind of regular ritual or habit that I could show up for that I think might bring me greater creative well-being and might have a positive effect on my life. And we'll never really know until we try it over time. And then over time, we're like, I'll just work with clients and I'll be like, okay, so after that last month and you woke up every morning and you danced for 15 minutes, or you did some writing practice, or you brainstormed 20 ideas before every meeting, how does it feel? And almost always people are like, oh, it feels great. Like I just need to do this all the time and then I'll feel better.
One thing that Twyla Tharp talked about in her book, which I think is so interesting, that really ties to what you're talking about, is this idea of creating an active ritual that kind of prepares you body and mind to get started. So Beethoven, for example, his active ritual is that every morning he would wake up, he would go for a walk, he would bring a pad of paper with him and a pen. And that walk, kind of what we were talking about just a moment ago, generated his ideas for the rest of the day. And then he would go into the studio space and he would begin his composing for the rest of the day. But that active ritual is what got him started. And so I have a friend who is a longtime writer. His active ritual is he would play the same REM song over and over and over again. And that would kind of like, he put on the song and that's when he would start to go into his kind of creativity mode. What are your thoughts on an active ritual?
Well, I also think something about the active ritual is it bridges you from like all the things that are going on in your life with whatever this, it's hard. Creativity is vulnerable, and the white page or the blank page, whatever that the metaphor of that is for you, is intimidating for all of us. So anything we can do to ease that transition. And that's why I think, like to sit down and say, today I'm going to write my opus is like how, you'll just feel deep pressure and kind of overwhelm at the task. So instead, I like little kind of ways in that feel approachable and gentle. And, I'm going to, take a walk, or I'm going to start with like a list, or I'm going to, sing for 5 minutes before. So a lot of times I'll help people do something that has nothing to do with what they're actually going to do, but it just gets your brain and body going in a way that feels low pressure for you. So I think that's part of what Beethoven and Twyla Tharp were doing, is like training their brain and body, that this is what we do. And when we do this, then we're going to go into our process, and also making it a little easier on themselves.
So I'm curious for our audience, do you have an active ritual? If so, what is it? And what are some of those things that help you to bridge the gap between where you are right now, where you may be feeling uncreative versus where you would like to be? And I particularly like this thought, Liz, about staring at a white page. And I know when I was getting ready to write my book, and I had 4 months to write this book, and the publisher had given me 4 months, and I was literally staring at a blank sheet. And so what I ended up doing is actually I decided I would channel my inner Ariana Huffington, and I got a picture of her and I put her, like propped her up right beside my laptop. And I thought to myself, okay, if Ariana can write 13 books, but at that time she'd written 13 books, she's written more since then, I can write one. So I'm going to channel my inner Ariana. That's what kind of got me over the board.
I think anything we can do to sort of source an inner power and inner any kind of like, guide or inner energy that's going to make you feel positive and motivated, because the forces against you are pretty powerful. So I call the voice inside of our heads the tiny terrorist. That's just my name for it. We all have, I think it's great to name whatever that inner critical voice is that we all have, because it shows up the second you sit down or show up to create. It's gonna come. And any kind of like opposite force, I like, people have like they channel Oprah, or they channel like a Yoda inside of them, something that will just kind of give you an opposite narrative of whatever that critical voice is saying, like you're not good enough, you're too much, all of that.
So that inner voice, that tiny terrorist, I've also heard that annoying roommate that lives in my head. What do you all call it? And what is it that you're having to overcome for our audience here? And so Liz, tell us it kind of, for all of us who are trying to bridge the gap between where we are and where we'd like to be, we'd like to manifest our full creative selves. Give us top 3 takeaways. And before we get there, around how we can each become that Tunde is sharing here, I was just telling my son, who is in the first year of college, which Tunde, I cannot believe, because I remember when your son was born, that we do not expect perfection. He needs to accept that good enough is good enough. He is a perfectionist who often sabotages himself because the work in one class is not perfect, even though he gets the top grades in the class. And so in your top 3 tips, maybe you can address that need for perfection.
So relatable, Tunde, and thank you for sharing that. The best way I know to work with perfection is to put more emphasis on curiosity. And I know I sometimes sound like a broken record about telling people to follow their curiosity, but I really don't believe we can be curious and in kind of that perfectionist fear, because perfectionist is a kind of fear, right? I'm afraid it's not good enough. I'm afraid I haven't done it all correctly. So it's making the curiosity bigger than the fear, and knowing the fear is always going to come. But how can I ask myself, well, what am I curious about here? Okay, I'm whittling away here. What's the question that's driving me forward? And that would really be my first tip, is can you connect with curiosity a little bit more today than you did yesterday? So can you ask kind of one more open-ended question, whether that's in a meeting or with somebody in your community, or of yourself today? Like I like to start every day with a question, just so that I can like not start every day with the tiny terrorist. So that would be
so curiosity over fear.
Yeah.
2 more quick tips around how we can become more creative.
Quick number 2 is to curate the inputs. So this is just like, can you surround yourself with inspiring inputs that ignite your senses? So again, like if you're feeling stuck, can you create a playlist about whatever it is, building the environment so that you're not pressuring yourself to make genius work, but I'm just going to create a great environment? Or can you bring a smell into your workday? There's something about when we activate our senses, it just helps build that palette of inspiration. And then we never know what any of that's going to spark. So just be more conscious about sort of what kind of inputs you're curating in your practice.
And then last but not least, so we've got curiosity over fear, curate inputs, and then last but not least.
And this is for all of you, especially who are leading teams and in communities, is really just to build a culture of courage around curiosity, which means when people share their creative ideas and work, can you just take that extra step to make people feel seen and heard when they share? Because that's going to affect their ability to share the next time. So we're all going to have good and bad and all the kinds of ideas. But if you can allow people to really feel acknowledged when they share their creative work, they'll have courage to do it again.
And so much of that really ties, this culture of courage really ties with building psychological safety, which is something that a lot of managers and leaders, fortunately, are getting trained on. So Liz, this has been an amazing conversation. We'd love to know how we can stay in touch with you in about 30 seconds or less.
I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. You can also find me on Instagram at Liz Kimball, and lizkimball.com is my website. I'd love to connect with you there.
And then also, I know AJ has given information in the chat here about how people can stay in touch with you and how they can get involved with your Creative 15 program, which I'm planning to do to reignite my creativity as I get ready to start on book number 2. I hope that you all can join me next month on November 17th. I will be interviewing Dr. Tracy Benson, author, academic activist, and social justice advocate. He's the founder of the Anti-Racist Leadership Institute. And then I also just launched Manager Monday, which is a LinkedIn newsletter that comes out the second Monday of every month. So look for the next one coming out on November 8th. Thank you all so much for being with us today. Liz, this was an amazing conversation. I am so grateful to you. I love you so much. Thank you so much for being here. And thanks to everybody who was here.
Thank you for having me. So great to see you all.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for being here.